with Warren Buffett. Well, he, as you all must know, he's now the most successful investor in history. But two things. Number one, he was rejected by Harvard Business School. And number two, up until the age of 20, he had an acute fear of public speaking. I go to his annual meetings every year, and there he is standing in a stadium like Madison Square Garden, but in Omaha. And there's about like 40 or 50,000 people there, and he talks for hours. And you would never imagine that, you know, up through college, just the mere thought of public speaking would make him literally throw up. He arranged his life so that he would never find himself in front of a crowd. And this all changed when he forced himself to sign up for a Dale Carnegie public speaking course. And that course completely changed his life. If you go to his office, and this actually was taken in his office, there's no college diploma on the wall, there's no business school diploma. He ended up going to Columbia. But he does have that $100 certificate up there, framed. And he says that that has had more of an impact on his subsequent success than any degree he has. And this got him, you know, to realize how important communication is. He explains that in graduate school you learn all this complicated stuff, but what's really essential is just being able to get others to follow your ideas. If you're a management leader, you want them to follow your business. And if you're a salesperson, you want them to follow your advice. So no matter what you do, good communication skills are incredibly important and something that almost anybody can improve upon, both in writing and in speaking. All right, well, to say that he is a wealth of wisdom is an understatement. There's so many great gems in his essay. But one of my personal favorites is something he taught me, which is that you can always tell someone to go to hell tomorrow. What does this mean? Basically, it's that you should really try to refrain from spouting off in a moment of anger, because you could say or do something that you might regret. So Warren says, just forget about it for a day. If you feel the same way tomorrow, tell them then you have not lost the opportunity. And I love that because it's so applicable to business life and everyday life. Another one of the things that we talked about was passion. And throughout the presentation, when you see the orange sign come up with a message, it means that it's a broad theme in the book. It's not just him. Almost everybody spoke about passion. And they all say that you really need to try to pursue something that you're passionate about. Because nothing is easy, and if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you might do an okay job, but you'll never have the fuel to really do an incredible job and jump the inevitable hurdles that are going to be in your way. And if you do something just for the money or because you think you should, it probably won't end well. This is Hans Zimmer. He's a famous composer. He did the music for The Lion King, among many other things you've heard of. And we discussed this topic, and he said, whenever I need legal or medical advice, I go announce my problems to my orchestra. Half are doctors and half are lawyers whose parents forced them into those jobs. So, well, Warren Buffett takes this passion thing one step further, and he says not only should you do something you're passionate about, but it's really important to know your strengths and weaknesses and do something within what he calls your circle of competence. And he says that knowing what to leave out is as important as knowing what to focus on. And he quotes his friend Tom Watson, who's the founder of IBM, and Tom said, I'm no genius, but I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots. So none of the people in this book, they're all wildly successful. None of them are good at everything, but they are all doing something they're passionate about, and that is within their own personal circle of competence. All right, we all know this guy. And no matter how much you love what you're doing right now. You never know, you might get fired. It happens, and why am I saying it with him up here? Because it happened to him. Before, right now, he's one of the richest men in the world. He was mayor of our city for 3 consecutive terms, and he founded Bloomberg LP. But before that, he worked at Salomon Brothers, and he loved it. He loved his job. He woke up every day excited, but after 15 years, they restructured the company, and he was one of the people who got the boot. And nobody rushed in to give him another job, and that is when he decided to start his own company, Bloomberg. And one of the things that really struck me about him is how hard he works. I mean, we all know you have to work hard to get anywhere and all that, but he really gives it a new meaning. Even after he was fired from Salomon Brothers, there was about 2 months before he was actually going to leave. And he said that he still made sure to work 6 days a week from as early in the morning till as late as he could. He was actually looking for office space during that time, and he told the broker that he could only look on the weekends because he didn't want anyone to ever say that he didn't work 110%. And I guess that's the kind of work ethic that got him elected mayor 3 times. Another thing that I just love about him that he talked about in his essay is that when he was starting his company, Bloomberg, he used to show up at the deli across from Salomon Brothers at 6 o'clock, and he would get a little tray, and he would get 2 coffees, 1 with milk, 1 without milk, and 2 teas, 1 with milk and 1 without milk. And then he would go around roaming the halls at 6, looking for a high-level executive who might be in there alone, with no secretary to guard. And he would pop his head in, and he was looking for feedback. He wanted feedback on his new business venture. So he would walk in and pop his head in the door and say, "Hey, I brought you coffee. Could I bend your ear?" And he figured no one is going to say, "Get out of here," if he brought them a coffee. And if they said they didn't drink coffee, he would say, "Well, then I have tea." But I love it because it's like he didn't think he was above anything, even being a little delivery man. Okay, well, his story brings me to another big topic, which is that careers have chapters. Even if you don't get fired, you never know. What you're doing right now might not be what you're going to be doing 4 or 5 years from now. But you do not have to have everything mapped out. But the important thing is to always keep your eyes open for new and good opportunities. This is Leslie Moonves. He's the president and CEO of CBS. And he actually began his career as an actor. He actually got sick of having to be a bartender to make ends meet, and he realized that he'd be happier on the other side of the camera. So that's how he got on his career path. And he says, if your path is too rigid, you'll likely miss out on opportunities. You have to be fluid and open to change. This is Gillian Michaels. She runs a health and wellness empire. She's a trainer, among many other things. And basically, she got into her profession only after she got fired as a talent agent. This is Kathy Ireland, and she has a really interesting career path. She started out as a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, and she now runs a $2 billion business called Kathy Ireland Worldwide, and she brands over 15,000 products. And a lot of people look at her and they say something along the lines of, yeah, well, if I was born looking like a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, I would throw my name out there and run a $2 billion business too. But that is absolutely not the case. She wanted to launch her own brand, and she tried and failed for years doing it. She tried with the skincare line, she tried with a beer company, she tried with different art projects. She just lost, all her money on all of those things. And she finally was able to launch her own brand with, of all things, a line of socks. She talks about how that happened. I could go on for an hour on each person, so I'm trying to move quick. But in her essay, but even once her brand started, it wasn't easy. She talks about sleeping in airports to save money and how her company almost went bankrupt at a certain point. She says that people always come up to her and tell her about a business idea that they had, but then they, stopped pursuing because they met some form of rejection or someone in their life didn't think it was a good idea. And she says to them, you stop because of that? If you never fail, it means you're not trying hard enough. And this is a huge theme in the book. My subjects really warn against allowing fear of failure to paralyze you. And everyone fails. When it happens to you, you just have to think, this is just part of the process. And if you remember this next time you fail, it'll really help. A quick personal story is that when my book just came out, I wanted to write an article for Forbes. So someone put me in touch with an editor, and I spent about a week writing an article. I handed it in, the guy didn't like it. So then I spent another week writing an article. I handed it in to this editor, and he said no again. And I tried really hard. So I wrote him and I said, okay. He had kind of written me off. But anyway, I said, Kathy Ireland says if you don't feel like you're not trying hard enough, do you mind if I try again? And he didn't even write me back. But I tried again, and my third article got in. So keep these words. This is John Paul DeJoria. He has an awesome story. He is the founder of John Paul Mitchell Hair Systems, which is a very successful line of hair care products, and he's also the founder or the co-founder of the Patron Spirits Company, who makes that delicious tequila some of you might have tried. Anyway, so he is now worth billions of dollars. He grew up without much money, and when I say without much money, he talks in his essay about a time when between him, his brother, and his mother, they had a total of 27 cents. And he never went to college. He had a series of jobs, and he got fired from a series of jobs and ended up living in his car for $2.50 a day. He describes exactly how this went on in the essay, where he showered, what he ate, all of that. But he brings up an interesting topic, which is how many of my subjects credit early jobs in sales for equipping them with the skills they needed for their ultimate success. And he is one of them. So one of his jobs was selling encyclopedias door to door. And he says this was one of the most formative experiences of his life, so much he said that if this job existed today, he would make every one of his kids do it. I'm trying to figure out a job like that because my daughter is here in the audience, and I need her to be banging on doors selling something. He's convinced me. Anyway, so basically, to do this job, he had to literally go to a house, knock on the door. He first had to convince the people to let him make a presentation. Then once he got past that hurdle, he had to convince them to buy a set of encyclopedias for their family. And this taught him two great things. It taught him, number one, to hone his powers of persuasion, which gets back to what Warren Buffett was talking about. And the other thing is overcoming rejection, because he got, door after door slammed in his face, and he learned that if he wanted to make a sale, he had to be as enthusiastic at the 16th door as he was at the first, even though he had had so many slammed in his face. And when he launched his first huge business, his hair care product line, he had to go from beauty salon to beauty salon selling this, and he got, doors slammed in his face, and 4 out of 5 people turned him away, but he knew better than to let that discourage him. One more thing that he taught me, which is very relevant to sales, is he stresses the importance of being passionate about what you sell. He said that the average life of an encyclopedia salesman was 3 days. But he did it for 3 years. And he says he was able to last that long because he truly believed that everyone needed a set of those books and that he was doing something good for his customers. So he says, if you don't believe in what you're selling, then you're just a salesman. I saw myself as somebody who helped people make the right decision. This is Matthew Weiner. He is the creator of the hit TV show Mad Men that just ended. And what's interesting is that that show, it took 7 years from the time he wrote it till the time it finally made it to the screen. In that time, it was rejected and rejected and rejected all over Hollywood. But that's not all, that's not the only tough time he had. He actually went to USC Film School, and upon graduation, he couldn't get a job, and he couldn't even get a meeting with an agent who could hopefully try to help him get a job. So he spent 3 years writing spec scripts from home. And Matt says, I attempted to shop my material around, but nothing sold. I got very bitter seeing people I didn't think deserved it succeed. It was a dark time. Show business looked so impenetrable that I eventually stopped writing. I began watching TV all day and lying about it. My mother would call me to drive my brother-in-law to the airport. That's the kind of crap I was doing instead of being a writer. I felt like the most useless, worthless person in the world. Well, Matt gave a lot of advice, but one piece that I'll repeat is that he says when somebody rejects your work, you have to listen to the fact that they don't like it, but you shouldn't always listen to the reason why. And he says a lot of times people give some capricious justification to stop from hurting your feelings. And if you start changing your business or whatever it is you're doing, for every rejection you get, you're gonna end up running around in circles trying to please an imaginary audience. So he stuck to his guns, and the show that we all know is what he wanted it to be from the start. And so it paid off in his case. This is David Boies, and he is one of the world's most highly acclaimed attorneys. First of all, he has a surprising history. He couldn't read until he was in 3rd grade because he suffers from dyslexia. And then after high school, he had no intention of going to college. He just wanted to be a surfer, and he basically made most of his money playing cards. This all changed when his wife got pregnant, and she sort of nudged him to get serious. And he talks about his career path in the book, but being a lawyer, your career has a lot of ups and downs. So he's won a lot of big cases. He's also lost a lot of big cases. So I talked about, how he gets through those times. And I love what he said because it's applicable to many aspects of life. He said, no matter what you do, there will be times when things go well and times when things go badly. The only thing for sure in either scenario is that things will change. When something good happens, I try to enjoy it. When something bad happens, I try to understand why it happened. But in either case, the next day I'm on to something else. And this is a big theme with the people in my book. None of them allow themselves to wallow for too long. They learn from their mistakes and then they move on. This is Sara Blakely. Unlike David Boies, her dream was to be a lawyer. Her whole life was geared towards it. She took debate in high school, and she used to leave school to go watch her father in court. He was an attorney. When it finally came time for her to take the LSAT, she bombed it. So she, picked herself up off the floor and took it again, and she did 1 point worse. So she drove off and got a job loading people And then she spent 8 years selling fax machines door to door. I'm going to get to what she learned from that, but she finally one day had her aha moment when she put on a pair of white pants and she did not like how her butt looked. So she was wishing that she had some control top pantyhose, but she wished that they didn't have the feet because she wanted to wear sandals. So she invented something called Spanx. She's now a billionaire, and she talks about the importance of keeping a young idea secret. She didn't tell anybody about Spanx for a year. She worked on it quietly for a year, and she says that ideas are the most vulnerable the moment you have them. Hearing discouraging remarks early on will likely take you off course. You'll either end up deflated or spend your time defending your idea instead of going for it. So when she finally told her friends and family that her big idea she had been working on was basically footless pantyhose, they all laughed at her. And then when they realized she was serious, they tried to convince her not to do it and said, well, if it is a good idea, the big guys will knock you off. But she'd already been so invested that it was too late to get her off course. She says, I'm pretty positive that if I had told my friends and family about Spanx early on, I would still be selling fax machines door to door. But getting to what she learned from that experience, she learned that face-to-face makes a huge difference. So when she started Spanx, she had to make a prototype of her product. And she called a bunch of different hosiery mills over the phone to try to convince them to make this footless pantyhose for her, and no one would do it. So she took a week off of work, and she drove around, because she thought, all right, face-to-face. She drove around, and she literally would camp out in the reception area and wait to speak to the business owner or operator. And finally, this paid off. She convinced one man to make her, her prototype, and that's how Spanx was born. She also learned the power of humor from her door-to-door selling. She says that you have about 15 seconds to capture somebody's attention, but if you can make them smile or laugh, you get an extra 15 to 30. So she had no money to get anyone's attention for Spanx the traditional way, which is through advertising. So she infused her product with as much humor as she could, from naming it Spanx to writing things like, we've got your butt covered on the packages. She made something really boring like pantyhose, something people like to joke about, and she has gotten free press everywhere, from the Oprah Winfrey Show to Glee and Sex and the City, you name it, everybody talks about Spanx. Oh, I'm not going to talk about him. Somehow, all right. Well, he's awesome.
Next.
Yeah. I might have sent the wrong thing. Anyway, okay.
Now everybody wants to know.
Okay, that was Jeff Kinney, who did the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. He's awesome, but I just don't want to take up so much time. So, well, if you can ask me in the Q&A about him. Okay. This is Anderson Cooper, and he's another one people like to think that they have all summed up. It's not included in his essay, but he is Gloria Vanderbilt's son.
She's a beautiful woman, people. Not Bruce Jenner.
Yeah. Anyway, he grew up in a really wealthy family, and now he is, a really famous journalist. But people like to think, well, he must have gotten his foot in the door with connections, and he must have just had a really cushy, easy life. This is really not the case. I'm going to read the beginning of his essay. He says, my father died during heart bypass surgery when I was 10 years old. When I was 21, my 23-year-old brother committed suicide. He jumped off the terrace of our family's penthouse apartment as my mother pleaded for him to stay put. I think that anytime you experience traumatic loss early on, it changes who you are and drastically affects your view of the world. At least that was the case with me. So he had a really tough time emotionally from that. But then when he finally decided that he wanted to be a foreign news correspondent, he could not even get an entry-level job at any major network, despite his family's connections, and despite the fact that he went to Yale. So, he finally, through a friend, got a job at an agency called Channel One, which made programming that was broadcast in high schools. And he quickly realized that when you work at a company, people tend to pigeonhole you in whatever role you happen to be in. And if you want to do something different, sometimes you have to do something drastic to change people's perception of you. And you really just have to make your own opportunities. No one is going to come up to you and say, you look like you'd be great on air, and you know, come here, I've got a position for you. You really have to make things happen for yourself. So in his case, he quit his job. He went overseas with a fake press pass and a camera that he borrowed from a friend, and he lived in roach-infested motels and slept on rooftops. He lived on $5 a day, and he made stories that were really interesting. And he came back and he sold them to Channel One for such a low price that they couldn't refuse, and that's how he launched his career, which is another big theme, create your own opportunities. And Anderson says, I rarely ask people for advice or permission when I'm planning on doing something I feel strongly about. That only opens the plan up to be crapped on. This is Jim Cook, and he is the founder of Sam Adams Beer, actually of the Boston Beer Company. He got his joint JD MBA at Harvard, and then he got a high-paying job at a company called the Boston Consulting Group. And it was the kind of job that a lot of his classmates would be super jealous of. But he was miserable. He really didn't like it there. But he was worried. He really wanted to start his own brewery, but he was worried about risking it all to embark on a startup, until he realized that while starting his own business seemed like a risky thing to do, the real risk was wasting years of his life stuck in something that appeared attractive but that he didn't really enjoy. So this is another theme. The biggest risk is often not taking a risk. And this leads me to my next subject, which is J. Craig Venter. He is a scientist. He is the first person to sequence the human genome. And what that means, because I didn't know exactly what that meant before I researched it, basically sequencing the human genome is just reading a human's DNA to see what it has to say. And from that, you know what kind of genes you have, if you have the gene for this kind of cancer or whatever, and the medical possibilities that this information can lead to are endless. So he's helped us more than anybody in the book. And you might think that a genius scientist like this would have been a good student. Well, not this one. He literally slid by on a D- from high school. The only way he even got that D- was that they made him write an extra paper that no one else wrote because they didn't want to see his face again the next year. And like David Boies, he did not want to go to college. He wanted to surf. And he moved to Southern California, and he got a job at Sears putting price tags on stickers at night. And he drove a fuel truck at the airport and was a baggage handler, that kind of thing. Well, his plan got foiled when he got drafted to go to Vietnam, and that's when the course of his life started to change. He joined the medical corpsman school, and when he got there, he was just overwhelmed with what he saw, with hundreds to thousands of people his own age dying every day, and he didn't believe in what America was doing there, and he decided to end his life. So I'm going to read this little passage from the book. He said, "I went to the beach, got in the water, and started swimming out to sea. My plan was to keep going till I was exhausted, then sink into the dark waters in oblivion. More than a mile out, I saw a venomous sea snake surface to breathe. I began to have doubts about what I was doing, but I continued on until I encountered a shark. I was instantaneously consumed with fear. All thoughts of dying departed, and I realized that I very much wanted to live. I wanted to live more than I ever had in the previous 21 years of my life. I turned around and, driven by sheer adrenaline, swam for the shore in a state of panic. Once I made it to safety, I never looked back. Something inside me had changed. I wanted my life to mean something. I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to do something to make up for everything I saw in Vietnam and honor those who were already beyond my help." So at first he thought he would become a doctor, and then eventually he realized he could make a bigger impact if he was a scientist. And basically, he rose to the top of his field by going out on professional limbs that very few people would. And he explains that his time serving in Vietnam really helped him put things in perspective. He says, "Out there I had to worry about losing my life multiple times a day. Being back in the comfort of America with my life relatively protected, career risks seemed pretty trivial." So that's an important thing when you're thinking about taking a risk or doing something where you might fail. I have heard other people who read obituaries every day to keep things in perspective. Question everything and expect resistance to new ideas and approaches. This is another big theme in the book. You know, they say that you've got to look around the world and think that just because something has been done one way for years doesn't mean it's the best way, and doesn't mean that another way won't work. But that you've got to watch out, because people often react to something new and different in a negative way. It can be a threat to somebody's own way of doing things, or it could be a threat to other businesses. That's another, I said the wrong thing. Anyway, this is, Gary Hirschberg. He is the founder of Stonyfield Farms, which is the organic yogurt company. And he started being a proponent of organic food before anyone really knew what it was. He saw that we were spraying our food with poison and injecting our animals with hormones and antibiotics, and he didn't think this was okay, but nobody else really knew about it, and people made fun of him for being, you know, a crazy hippie, and his company did not make a nickel for the first 9 years, and now it's the largest organic yogurt company in the world, and we all know what organic is, and every major food company has an organic line, and it's in all of the supermarkets, but it was resisted for a while. This is Ian Schrager. He came into the limelight when he and his partner, Steve Rubell, founded the nightclub Studio 54. It was wildly popular, and the success went to their heads. And they started to think that the rules didn't apply to them. They did not pay income taxes, and they ended up going to prison for 13 months. He talks about this experience in his essay, how it was so devastating and humiliating, and he talks about how he was able to get through this basically by reading stories about people who had suffered, you know, hard times and made it through it. And afterwards, he was able to reinvent himself as a real estate developer and a hotelier. And he calls himself proof that the prison system works. And he says there's very little in life that you can't recover from. So of all my subject, I think he sums up a huge theme of this book best. He says, in the end, there's so little that separates people. Those who want success the most and are relentless about pursuing it are the ones who get it. So I'm going to end with one last quote from me, which is, remember whack-a-mole. That's whack-a-mole. It's the game that you see at carnivals where the moles stick their head up and you've got to whack them down with the hammer. So what does this mean? Well, a lot of people have asked me what the most common thread between this diverse group of subjects is. And really, they're all moles from the whack-a-mole game. Life seems to just whack us all over the head from time to time. It can be in big ways or small ways, and it could be in ways that have to do with your career or ways that have to do with your personal life, and then that seeps into everything. But everybody in my book is where they are today because even though they got whacked, they found a way to pop their heads back up. They might have gone down into the hole and felt sorry for themselves for a minute, learned from their mistakes, but they all found a way to pop their head back up. And I think that's what you have to do in this world. As David Boies says, things change. Things inevitably change. So the next time any of you get a little whack, think of a story that inspires you. Remember whack-a-mole, and then figure out a way to get your head up out of whatever hole you happen to be in.
Thank you so much. That was really great. It's really impressive, having the opportunity to meet with such influential people and distilling that. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So it's truly amazing that A, you had access to these people, B, that you got to get so deep, and then C, that you can distill it into a book that we all get to share and enjoy. So it's a pleasure to chat with you. And I think a lot of the central themes here too are really applicable to this community. When I think about whether it's starting a company or being in sales, getting that corporate access, hitting your head up against the wall, and getting past it. A lot of these things are just common threads for a lot of people in the room. But in particular, I think you learned too that none of these people had an easy path, and everything looks easy as an outsider. Once you see somebody like Bloomberg have the success he has, with $3 billion in cash flow a year, it's amazing. This guy makes so much money, but guess what? He's been fired. Like some of these anecdotes are really, really helpful. So I think just sort of distilling it into a few questions that I have, and then I want to flip it to the crowd. But one of them for me is access. As I'm running my plan at Estimize, it's really about getting to the right person. So anecdotally, just very quickly, I actually met with Guy Spire, who paid $650,000 to meet with Warren Buffett. It's a pretty famous story. So several years ago for charity, a not very well-known hedge fund manager, Guy Spire, at Aquamarine Fund paid $650 to have lunch with Warren Buffett. I met him on Twitter. He had lunch with me for free, which was nice of him. And we traded books and so forth. But would love to just framing how you got to these people. Maybe Warren's one of the most instructive because he probably has the biggest layer around him, I'm guessing. But how did you get access to these people? Like Warren Buffett as an example. How do you get in with people like this?
Well, I had lunch with Guy and he introduced me. Just kidding.
I thought it was unique.
Well, basically, this is a long answer. It's not like a quick answer. And I wrote an article on LinkedIn detailing this because it was something that sort of came like second nature, and then so many people were curious about this that I had to sit down and think like, what is it that what are my tricks? So I really wrote an article, so check that article out. But basically, you have to be very politely persistent, and you have to know when a no is a real no, or is it just that someone else fended you off? Like, did the person you were asking even know that you asked? Was it a maybe later no, or a real no? So you have to sort of have a monitor, but you've got to be, you know, politely persistent. A friend of mine said to me early on, never take a no from somebody who can't give you a yes. And I held those words with me. So if I approached somebody through their publicist, and the publicist said no, it might be that my target never even knew. I would try it if I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who worked at the company. Could you get this on his desk? You just have to be a little relentless. And it also goes down to passion. It's really hard to have the energy to be this way. But when I was working on the book, I was so into the book, and I believed in it, you know, so much. I thought that the subjects who I was pursuing would be happy with it if they just said yes. So anyway, that's how I sort of got the fuel to do it. But that's, you know, a short answer. I could go on and on about that.
I'm sure each one has its own, like, ridiculous story, because these are not easy people to get to.
Yeah, I mean, another thing is, like, you have to toss your ego out the window. You have to know that as important as you think you might be, or what you're asking is, or whatever, you're not really that important to anyone else. So when you get ignored and all of that rejected, just move it aside and be like John Paul DeJoria showing up at the 16th door. As, you know, it's really, you can't let yourself get offended or discouraged or that kind of thing.
So switching gears a little bit, one thing that kind of surprised me about the book, I mean, there's so many great stories we can dig into, and I'm sure we will, but one of them actually I was a little curious about, and maybe I'll have some guidance here. None of these people really talked about mentors. It seemed like a lot of these people were sort of did it my way kind of people. Did you encounter sort of a bifurcation of some people had a leg up from a mentor, or were all of these people, they all sort of seemed like mavericks, you know, whether it was John Paul Mitchell, you know, sleeping in his car, or Sara Blakely, God forbid, you know, 8 years selling fax machines. They all had this hard knock sort of existence. Did any of them find mentorship? Because
you know what, I think they did. I think a lot of them, they might not have used the word mentor. And the word mentor, it's on the title of my book, but it kind of bugs me, because it's like, you can have a lot of mentors in your life, and you don't even have to call them mentors. So Warren Buffett, in his essay, talks about his heroes. And basically, we all are works in progress. We're always forming. We're always learning from different people. So he cites a lot of different people who taught him a lot of different things, from you know, his wife to people he works with to people who gave him the advice. Don't, you know, you can always tell someone to go to hell tomorrow. That actually was a piece of advice that a friend of his told him, and he incorporated that into his being. So Sara Blakely talks about how growing up, her father would sit around the dinner table and would ask her and her brother, have you failed in anything today? And if they said no, he'd be disappointed, because he didn't want them to be paralyzed by the fear of failure. He wanted them to know. So that's part of, you know, what made her who she is. So I guess people do talk about, in all the essays, they talk about people that they did learn from, but they don't call them mentors.
more like influencers, yeah. One of the gentlemen that you didn't speak about, Craig Newmark, I thought was a pretty interesting central character. So the founder of Craigslist, and one of his takeaways that really struck me too was, you know, I'm in sales, I like to talk a lot, sure, but listening is one of the most important components of what you do to really understand the other party. And that was one of his big takeaways was, I learned how to listen, and eventually he came up with the product people want, which is Craigslist. But what did you learn from listening to all these amazing people, active listening, or just listening generally? How does one become a better listener instead of just talking and presenting your view? Like, your book is amazing, and you went out there and said, you know, please be part of my book. What did you learn from listening to some of these people?
I think an important thing when you're having a conversation with people is to step out of it and give people a chance to talk and give them a chance to move the conversation. I think a lot of times when people talk, they partly want to show what they know, or it's about, you know. So if all I did was ask people about the things that I had researched, I wouldn't get any new material. And that's the same with anybody. You know, if you go to coffee with somebody, let them, you never know what they're going to give you if you give them a chance to talk. So I think that's important, to ask open-ended questions where you don't know what the response is going to be.
So I think I've been hogging the mic a bit, and it's been wonderful to hear all these anecdotes, and I think we've all learned a lot, but I want some questions from the crowd. See it there.
What were some of the big fish that got away?
They don't need to respond. I mean, they asked you to respond.
Oh, yeah, sure. So there's obviously 30 amazing people that Gillian got to speak to. Who did she miss? Who are some of the big fish?
You name a big fish, and that big fish got away. So the thing is, this is another thing that I love that Warren Buffett said. He's so successful, but he says there's a lot of opportunities that he has missed out on, and thank God there's no list of all of them, because people only look at your successes. And so people look at my successes and think, oh wow, you got a great, you know, and you might imagine that everybody I asked, or many of the people I asked, said yes, and that's not the case. Luckily, there's a lot of successful people out there in the world, and there wasn't one who I had to get or it was ruined. But I asked so many people, and I was ignored all the time and rejected all the time, and you know, and eventually the curtain had to close and the book came out. Otherwise, I'd still be doing it.
Is there any common theme as to why these people said yes to you?
You know, I don't know. Some of it had to do with how I could wiggle in, like if I happened to know somebody who knew someone who, you know, something. That's part of it. And I'm sure that there is, you know, like maybe these people are the people who are giving or don't mind talking. You have to have a certain kind of personality to share what the people in this book shared. And you also have to be at a certain place in your life. So even though, you know, Warren Buffett shared this, he would not have shared this if we caught him when he was 20, because he was in the midst of his fear, and you don't expose yourself. You know, you don't talk about all your failures until you're a success. Otherwise, you know, you might say, they all said I'd never make it, and maybe I never will. You know, so.
I'm just curious, sort of, did you use name dropping? In other words, once you got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, did that help get the next level and the next level and the next level of people? Or did
I can
you
repeat.
not do that and you just ask?
I can repeat that one because I think it's really, really valuable. So in sales, what we call a Lighthouse Client, or your first brand or your first name helps me get all the other names. So it's a great question. Once Gillian had like 3, 4, 5 people, was it easier? Was it like dominoes?
Oh, did I name drop? And how? Yes, totally. I mean, I would write, my letter would say, these are the big fish who are already in it. Will you know, my name is Gillian. Yeah, I would like start with like, my title would be Warren Buffett book. You know, yes, do whatever you can to get somebody's attention. Warren Buffett is in this book. Would you like to be in it? Anyway, not exactly that, but totally. Yeah.
It's a bit of a sorry, question. You know, everyone kind of measures success differently, whether it's financially, emotionally. How many of these individuals attributed their success to family? That it had something to do with, you know, how they were raised, or who nurtured them, or who, you know, it's like getting there for their healer. So how, I guess my question is, again, it's a bit convoluted, but how many of these people attributed their success to the people that surrounded them and loved them beyond just their own limitations?
A lot of people talk about how they were raised, and that, there's so many topics in this book that I had to think of what to do, because literally I could talk for an hour about each person. So a lot of people do talk about how they were raised, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So it's a really good book, I think, for parents to read, because it'll give you a lot of insights, and every time, after every essay, I think that's a message I want to make sure to get across to my kid. Some people attributed the fact that they weren't overscheduled as a child to allowing them to have creativity, that they were given free time. That's what J. Craig Venter, the scientist, he says he survived the education system because he avoided it. He just went out and did what he wanted to do, and he was creative. Anyway, so a lot of people talk about that.
Sorry, and the second part was, you dropped the word, which is creative. How many of these people felt or feel like they have a very creative aspect to their personality versus the analytical, business? Because a lot of these people are very successful financially, but there's an aspect of thinking outside the box and being creative that I'm just curious how many people think of themselves as being creative people versus, analytical, or is that
I don't know if I equate. I guess the word creative can be defined in different ways. So I don't know if I would call an out-of-the-box thinker a creative person exactly, or maybe you could, but it's different than, I have artists in the book who are creative and, musicians or whatever. So but they're all out-of-the-box thinkers. They're all, that's what leaders are. Leaders don't look and see what everybody else is doing. They think, okay, just because they did it this way doesn't mean that's the best way, or doesn't mean that's right, or I don't care how we do it. We're doing it this way, and that's what leaders do, and they're all leaders.
Oh, I was going to say we're overweight this side of the room, so we need to hit this other side of the road. In the front.
How long did it take to write this book, and what gave you the idea for it?
It took 5 years. It took 5 years, so that's the other thing with getting, and what took so long? Getting these people. I had to be patient and persistent. So anyway, and what motivated me is that I felt like I needed a mentor, or I never had one growing up, and I was so interested in reading these stories, in hearing these stories, and I thought other people would be too. So it was personal, and that's also what gave me the fuel to do it for 5 years and be so persistent.
Was it hard to get it published? Was it hard to get the whole process?
The whole thing was hard. It was hard. it was hard to get it published. And you would think that, okay, once I had Warren Buffett in it, all the other people would come running. That's not true either, because everybody lives in their own busy world, and everybody gets asked to do so many things. With I write about this in my LinkedIn article on how I networked with these people, but you have to realize that besides their job, which is a huge job, they have their families, they have friends, they have charity functions, they have people calling, could you do this, could you do this, could you do this, all day long. So sometimes they don't care if Warren Buffett's doing it. So.
There's a good tactic from Brian Johnson, the founder of Braintree. When he was first starting his company, he would walk up to small and medium businesses. He would just walk in and he would say, I need 5 minutes of your time to walk you through my payment processing system. And they were like, I don't know, no, go away. And then he basically discovered he would just offer them money. He was like, I'll pay you $100 for 5 minutes of your time. And that was it. And then they would start talking and they would forget about the offer. It's like, it's good to figure out tactics, like whatever works for you, but that one kind of resonated with me today. Right there.
When you were interviewing, did they ever say strike that?
Oh, well, what I did was I told everybody that I would send it back to them for their approval, and I wanted them to be as open as possible. You know, because I got a lot of things out of them that you know, were unguarded. So basically, very few, they might have like wanted to rephrase something a little bit, but I wrote it up, I sent it back to everybody for their approval, and it wasn't a difficult process.
They seem very emotional. These are really emotional stories, so I can imagine you kind of caught them, you know, in an interesting place.
Yeah, I mean, they had to be unguarded, and you know, or else it would be boring, you know.